The summer sun hung heavy over Fort Bragg, its heat pressing down on the soldiers assembled on the training field. Dust clung to their boots and uniforms, turning sweat into gritty streaks across tired faces. The drill sergeant's voice carried across the grounds, sharp and unrelenting, driving them into sparring exercises meant to test endurance and discipline. To most, it was just another grueling day. To Private First Class Emily Sanders, it was yet another chance to prove she deserved her place among them. Emily was one of the few women in the unit, a fact that followed her like a shadow. She had known from day one that acceptance would not come easily. Whispers trailed her in the barracks. Glances lingered too long in the mess hall. Some respected her determination, but others saw her as an intruder in a world they believed should remain exclusively theirs. Every morning, when she laced her boots, she reminded herself of her father's words. Respect isn't given here. It's earned in sweat. From the start, Emily outpaced most of her peers. She could run farther, lift heavier, and endure longer than many who doubted her. Each time she crossed the finish line ahead of the pack, however, she noticed the clenched jaws and narrowed eyes of those who resented her presence. Strength made her stand out, but it didn't shield her from resentment. If anything, it magnified it. That day, the exercise was close quarters combat. Soldiers squared off in pairs, striking, grappling, and testing each other's reflexes. The field echoed with the sound of boots scraping against dirt, fists striking padded gear, and the occasional grunt of exertion. Emily faced a soldier named Carter, a wiry but aggressive man who had always been openly dismissive of her. He had mocked her during runs, muttered insults when he thought she couldn't hear, and dismissed her victories as luck. The drill sergeant barked, and the fight began. Emily kept her stance firm, blocking Carter's first lunges and countering with controlled precision. For several minutes, they circled each other, exchanging strikes. Sweat dripped into Emily's eyes, but she didn't falter. She knew eyes were on her, waiting for her to slip. And then it happened. Her boot caught on uneven ground, throwing her balance off. Carter shoved her shoulder, and Emily tumbled hard into the dirt. The moment stretched, silent except for the pounding of boots around them. Emily braced her hands to push herself up, her vision blurred by sweat and dust. For an instant, it seemed Carter would offer her a hand, or at least step back and let her rise. That was what the rules dictated. But Carter's lips curled into a smirk, and before anyone could react, his boot lashed forward. The kick connected with the side of Emily's head. The sound was sickening, a dull thud against bone, followed by a sharp gasp from the watching soldiers. Emily's body crumpled, her hands clutching her temple as pain exploded through her skull. Her vision swam, stars bursting across her sightline, and the world tilted. The training field, the soldiers, the sergeant all, blurred into an indistinct haze as she struggled to breathe. For several seconds, no one moved. Carter stood above her, chest heaving, his face set in something between arrogance and defiance. The drill sergeant froze, his whistle half raised to his lips, but never blown. Soldiers looked at one another, unsure whether to intervene, their instincts battling with the unspoken rule of silence that had governed the unit for so long. Emily tried to rise, her arms trembling beneath her weight, but her body betrayed her. The dirt beneath her smelled of sweat, gun oil, and heat, pressing into her skin as her head throbbed with each attempt to lift it. Blood trickled from a cut at her temple, staining the dust. She gasped again, fighting not to black out. Whispers began at the edge of the formation. Did he just? He kicked her. She's hurt. Voices rose in disbelief, then fell into uneasy silence. The weight of the act sank in like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading outward. This wasn't training anymore. This was something else. Something darker. The sergeant finally snapped out of his paralysis, shouting for medics. His voice cracked with urgency, carrying across the grounds. Soldiers shifted uneasily, some stepping forward, others frozen by fear of retaliation or reprisal. No one wanted to be the first to break the unwritten code of silence. For years, the unit had thrived on intimidation. Speaking out meant isolation, punishment, or worse. Medics rushed onto the field, kneeling beside Emily. One held her head steady, checking her pupils as another called for a stretcher. She winced at every touch, her eyes fluttering open and closed. The world felt unreal, like she was floating outside her body. She heard fragments of voices, concussion, bleeding, pulse steady, but couldn't string them together. Carter stood back, arms crossed, unrepentant. His smirk faded into something colder as he realized the attention shifting to him wasn't admiration but horror. Still, he didn't speak, didn't apologize. To him, it seemed, this was nothing more than proving a point that Emily didn't belong. As Emily was carried off the field, her limp body strapped to a stretcher, the atmosphere shifted. What had begun as an ordinary training session now hung over the unit like a storm cloud. Soldiers avoided each other's eyes, the weight of complicity pressing down on them. Everyone knew the kick wasn't an accident, and everyone knew the chain of command would soon demand answers. By the time Emily reached the infirmary, word of the incident had already begun to spread. Soldiers whispered in the chow line, clerks murmured in offices, and rumors spread across barracks. They kicked her in the head. She collapsed right there. The sergeant froze. The details grew with each retelling, but the core truth remained undeniable. Something terrible had happened on that field, something no excuse could erase. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness as doctors examined her. The fluorescent lights burned against her skull, the antiseptic smell making her stomach churn. She remembered Flash's boots striking dirt, Carter's face, the sudden burst of pain, but much of it felt like fragments from someone else's life. A nurse wiped blood from her temple and whispered gently, "You're safe now. Just breathe." But safety was a fragile illusion. Outside, the army machine had already begun to turn. The incident report was being drafted, commanding officers alerted. What might have been brushed off as training gone wrong could no longer be ignored. Too many had seen it. Too many had felt the shock ripple through the ranks. For Emily, the pain was real, but the humiliation cut deeper. She had fought so hard to be respected, to show she was no different from anyone else. Now, her most public moment in the unit was one of vulnerability, of being struck down not in combat, but by the very comrades sworn to stand beside her. That night, as she lay in a hospital bed with monitors beeping steadily, Emily stared at the ceiling. She thought of her father, of his words about earning respect. She wondered if respect was even possible in a place where cruelty passed for strength. The kick had left her with more than a concussion. It had left her with a question that would haunt her for years. Was the army willing to protect her? Or would it bury the truth like it always had? Unbeknownst to her, 4 generals had already received the first report. And unlike the many voices silenced before, hers would not be ignored. The moment Emily was carried off on the stretcher, the training field descended into an uneasy quiet. The sound of boots scuffing against dirt, once constant, faltered into nothing. Soldiers stood rigid, their expressions unreadable, some shifting nervously, while others kept their eyes locked on the ground. A faint breeze stirred the dust, carrying with it the metallic tang of sweat and blood. The day had begun like every other a punishing exercise under the Carolina sun, but now it felt like the ground beneath them had shifted. Private Carter, the man who had struck Emily, lingered at the center. His arms hung loosely at his sides, fists still curled, his breathing heavy but measured. He looked at no one, his jaw set as if daring anyone to challenge him. Some soldiers had expected the drill sergeant to berate him instantly, to drag him off the field in disgrace. Instead, the sergeant's face was pale, his whistle clenched tight in his fist but silent. He muttered into his radio, his voice clipped, summoning more medical personnel, but he said nothing to Carter. That silence, the failure to address the act immediately, was louder than any shout could have been. It spread across the formation like poison, making each soldier ask the same question. If leadership wouldn't act now, would they ever? Emily's blood stained the dirt, a dark mark left behind as a reminder of what had just taken place. A few soldiers glanced at it, then quickly looked away, afraid to acknowledge it. The unspoken code of the unit was at work again. For years, they had been taught that weakness was intolerable, that reporting misconduct made you a target. But this wasn't hazing, and it wasn't an accident. Everyone knew what they had witnessed. Specialist Ramirez, a soft-spoken soldier who had trained with Emily before, clenched his jaw until it ached. He wanted to shout, to demand Carter be arrested on the spot. But his mind flicked to the last soldier who had raised concerns about mistreatment in the unit. That man had been reassigned within weeks, labeled unreliable, his career effectively ended. Ramirez swallowed his anger, his hands tightening around his rifle until his knuckles whitened. Nearby, Sergeant First Class Miller watched with narrowed eyes. He was older, hardened by deployments, and not easily shocked. But even he had never seen a soldier deliberately assault another in training so brazenly. His instinct was to confront Carter, yet he hesitated. Miller knew the unit's leadership had a habit of protecting their favorites, and Carter was one of them. Speaking out could brand him a troublemaker, undermine years of service. So he stood silent, his conscience gnawing at him. The medics moved quickly, lifting Emily onto the stretcher and fastening straps across her chest and legs. Her eyelids fluttered as she groaned, disoriented. One medic checked her pupils with a small light, frowning. "Concussion," he muttered to his partner. They moved her toward the waiting Humvee, its engine idling as the dust swirled. Carter followed their movements with an expressionless stare. To the soldiers watching, his lack of remorse was almost worse than the act itself. He didn't flinch, didn't hang his head. Instead, he looked as though he believed he had proven something that Emily didn't belong. Some of the younger soldiers found themselves wondering if this was the expectation, if this was the unspoken lesson the unit endorsed. The drill sergeant finally broke the silence, his voice brittle as he ordered the soldiers to reform. "Back in line. Training continues." His command fell flat. Nobody wanted to throw punches anymore. Nobody wanted to run drills. The energy of the group had collapsed, replaced by the weight of what they had witnessed. Yet no one dared refuse. They fell back into place, moving through the motions like ghosts, their minds elsewhere. By the time the session ended, whispers had begun. In the barracks, soldiers spoke in low tones. He kicked her right in the head. She was down. He still hit her. The sergeant froze. Didn't do a damn thing. Each retelling grew sharper. Details passed along like contraband. Within hours, the story had traveled across the company. By evening, soldiers from other units were already asking questions. The tale had taken on a life of its own. Emily, meanwhile, lay in the base infirmary. Her head throbbed with every heartbeat, pain radiating across her temple. She drifted between moments of lucidity and darkness. When she opened her eyes, fluorescent lights blurred above her, and the antiseptic smell of the ward filled her senses. Nurses checked her vitals, doctors ordered scans, and voices floated in and out. She caught fragments, minor bleeding, close monitoring, possible observation overnight. But none of it anchored her. What weighed heavier was the memory of the kick, the betrayal etched into her skull as surely as the pain. The chain of command received its first official report that evening. The initial write-up described the injury as sustained during combatives training, a sterile phrase that stripped away the violence of the act. But attached statements from two medics painted a starker picture. Emily had been kicked while down, an action inconsistent with training protocols. Those statements moved the report up the ladder faster than usual. At battalion headquarters, Major Daniels read the report twice, his brow furrowed. He knew this unit had a reputation complaints of hazing, rumors of misconduct, but rarely did evidence reach his desk so directly. This time, there was a wounded soldier and multiple witnesses. Daniels understood immediately that this incident wouldn't remain contained. He called his superior, setting in motion a series of conversations that reached far beyond the base. Back in the barracks, Carter sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. A few soldiers passed by, some offering him wary glances, others refusing to meet his eyes. He remained stone-faced, his thoughts unreadable. Whether he felt pride, regret, or nothing at all, no one could tell. But one thing was certain. His actions had cracked open something the unit could no longer hide. By midnight, the entire base buzzed with speculation. Some believed Carter would be quietly disciplined, maybe demoted or transferred. Others whispered that higher-ups were furious, that this time the unit's culture of silence had finally gone too far. Still others wondered what would happen to Emily, whether she'd recover, whether she'd speak out, whether her voice would even matter. For the soldiers who had stood frozen on the field, the memory replayed endlessly. The sight of Emily on the ground, the sound of the kick, the paralyzing silence afterward, it all lingered, gnawing at their conscience. Many lay awake that night, questioning whether they had failed not just Emily, but themselves. Unseen to them all, the report had already reached 4 generals by morning. And those men, hardened by years of command, would not let the silence hold. Emily woke in the base hospital to the steady beep of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Her head pounded as if someone had driven a hammer into her skull. She blinked, disoriented, the memory of Carter's boots slamming into her temple, replaying in jagged flashes. A nurse leaned over her, speaking softly. "You're at Womack Army Medical Center. You've had a concussion, but you're stable." Emily wanted to ask about her unit, about what would happen next, but the words stuck in her throat. She closed her eyes, forcing herself not to cry. The hospital room was quiet, save for the occasional footsteps in the corridor. Emily's body ached, but the greater weight pressed on her mind. She had endured ridicule before, endured the whispers that she didn't belong. But this was different. She had been assaulted, not by an enemy on foreign soil, but by a fellow soldier in the middle of training. And the worst part was the silence. No one had stepped forward to stop it. No one had immediately spoken up. That silence haunted her more than the pain. Meanwhile, across the base, paperwork was being filed. The first report, drafted by the drill sergeant, described the event in cautious terms. PFC Sanders injured during combatives exercise. Head trauma sustained. It sounded clinical, almost accidental. But attached were the medics' accounts, and they didn't pull punches. Soldier was down on the ground when struck by another's boot. Injury inconsistent with authorized training. Those words changed everything. They transformed the report from an unfortunate training mishap into evidence of misconduct. Major Daniels, who oversaw several units at Fort Bragg, sat at his desk that evening reading the report. His office was dimly lit, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Daniels had seen many reports of injuries, but few written with such bluntness by medics. He read the words again, inconsistent with authorized training, and felt his stomach turn. He knew this unit. Its reputation was notorious. Complaints had surfaced before: hazing rituals, bullying, harassment swept under the rug. Each time, the evidence had been thin, easy to dismiss. But this was different. Daniels picked up the phone and dialed his commanding officer. "Sir, we've had an incident," he began, keeping his tone measured. He summarized the report, detailing Emily's condition and the disturbing circumstances. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the reply came, heavy and deliberate. "Send it up." "All of it?" By morning, the report had reached the desk of Lieutenant General Robert Stanton, one of the most feared and respected leaders on the East Coast. Stanton was a man who believed discipline was the backbone of the Army, and any breach was intolerable. He read the account with a growing fury, his jaw tightening. When he reached the line about the unit standing silent as Emily was kicked, he slammed the folder shut. "Unacceptable," he muttered. "Completely unacceptable." But Stanton wasn't the only one who would see it. Within hours, the report had been circulated to 3 other generals' leaders, who had long been frustrated by rumors surrounding this unit. Major General Anita Clark, known for her uncompromising stance on ethics, read it with cold eyes. Lieutenant General Samuel Brooks, a battle-hardened veteran with no patience for arrogance, shook his head in disgust. And Brigadier General Marcus Hensley, younger but fiercely principled, pushed the file away and muttered, "This ends now." 4 generals, 4 different commands, all reading the same report, and all arriving at the same conclusion. The unit was rotten, and Emily's assault was the breaking point. Meanwhile, in the barracks, soldiers whispered nervously. Rumors flew faster than facts. Some claimed Carter was being shielded by leadership. Others insisted he would face a court-martial. A few speculated that the entire unit was under investigation. Soldiers who had witnessed the event replayed it over and over in their minds, their guilt gnawing at them. They knew they had failed Emily, and now they feared the Army would see them as complicit. Carter, for his part, remained disturbingly calm. He walked the halls of the barracks as if nothing had happened, his expression unreadable. Some avoided him, others glared, but no one confronted him directly. His confidence or arrogance only deepened the unease. To many, it was a sign that he expected protection, that he believed the system would cover for him, as it always had. At Womack, Emily was visited by her squad leader, who stood awkwardly at her bedside. He offered generic words of encouragement, his tone hollow. "You'll be back on your feet soon," he said, avoiding her eyes. Emily nodded faintly, but said nothing. She knew he wouldn't speak the truth. He wouldn't admit what everyone had seen. His silence was just another reminder of how alone she was. But the silence was beginning to fracture. In the offices where generals worked, anger simmered. General Clark drafted a memo demanding a full inquiry. General Brooks called his aides, ordering them to prepare for an on-site inspection. General Stanton scheduled a meeting with the others, insisting they confront the issue together. And General Hensley, determined to ensure this wasn't brushed aside, contacted his legal staff about precedent for shutting down entire units. For the first time in years, the whispers about this unit were not being ignored. They were being amplified, carried upward by the undeniable brutality of Carter's kick and the courage of 2 medics who refused to soften their words. Emily, unaware of the storm brewing above her, lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. Her head still ached, her body still trembled, but a flicker of determination burned in her chest. She thought of her father's words again. Respect isn't given, it's earned in sweat. She had given her sweat, her strength, even her blood. And now, she wondered, would the Army finally give her something back, Justice? The answer was already in motion. 4 generals, each furious in their own way, were preparing to descend on Fort Bragg, and when they arrived, nothing would remain the same. The morning air at Fort Bragg carried a tension unlike any other. Soldiers shuffled through their routines, lining up for formation, checking gear, performing duties, but their movements felt stiff, mechanical. Word had spread quickly. Generals were coming. Not one, not two, but four. No one could remember the last time such a gathering had occurred for a single unit. It was unprecedented, and it sent a shiver through the ranks. In the company barracks, Private Carter sat polishing his boots with deliberate slowness. He had heard the whispers too, but his face betrayed no fear. If anything, his smirk suggested confidence. He believed he knew the game better than anyone. The army punished weakness, not aggression. In his mind, he had shown dominance, and dominance was rewarded. He expected protection, maybe a slap on the wrist, but nothing more. His arrogance stood in stark contrast to the dread settling over his fellow soldiers. At headquarters, the arrival of 4 high-ranking generals created organized chaos. Clerks scrambled to prepare briefing packets. Captains and majors reviewed training schedules, trying to anticipate questions. Every desk buzzed with tension. The colonels of the brigade fidgeted, knowing the investigation wasn't just about Emily's injury. It was about their leadership, their failures, their oversight. By 0900, black sedans rolled through the gates. Soldiers snapped to attention as the convoy approached. General Robert Stanton led the group, his tall frame imposing even before he stepped from the vehicle. His expression was carved from stone, unreadable, yet heavy with intent. Beside him walked Major General Anita Clark, her eyes scanning every detail with quiet ferocity. Lieutenant General Samuel Brooks followed, shoulders squared, his pace brisk, his face set in hardened lines that told of combat tours and zero tolerance for foolishness. Brigadier General Marcus Hensley brought up the rear, younger than the others but no less determined, his sharp gaze flicking across the soldiers who saluted nervously as they passed. The 4 generals moved with unison, their silence speaking volumes. The air seemed to tighten around them, the weight of their presence pressing down on everyone nearby. Soldiers watched, wide-eyed, whispering under their breath once the convoy disappeared from view. They're really here, 4 of them. This is bad, real bad. Inside the battalion headquarters, the generals convened with the brigade commander, Colonel Raymond Holt. Holt, normally confident and brash, struggled to maintain composure. He welcomed them with stiff formality, his palms sweating. The generals wasted no time. General Stanton placed the incident report on the table with a sharp thud. "We've read this," he said flatly. "But reports can be written to soften truth. We want to see for ourselves every detail." The interrogation began immediately. Clark asked pointed questions about prior complaints, her voice calm but unyielding. Were there previous reports of misconduct in this unit? Holt hesitated, fumbling through paperwork. "There were minor issues, ma'am, but nothing substantiated." Clark's eyes narrowed. "Minor issues don't produce concussions during training." Brooks leaned forward, his tone sharp. Why was the sergeant on duty unable or unwilling to stop the assault the moment it happened? Holt stammered about shock, about the unpredictability of combativeness exercises. Brooks cut him off. "I've led men in firefights where chaos reigned. Leaders don't freeze. If they do, soldiers die. That's not an excuse." Hensley spoke last, his voice quieter but more cutting. "Colonel, how many complaints have been dismissed in your command? How many voices silenced?" Holt swallowed hard. He had no answer that would satisfy. The generals left the office dissatisfied. They wanted truth, not excuses. And so they turned directly to the soldiers. In the barracks, the announcement came suddenly. All personnel were to report to designated areas for interviews. Groups were pulled aside, their statements taken individually. Some soldiers, nervous and unsure, repeated the official line that it was an unfortunate accident. that emotions ran high during training. But others, emboldened by the gravity of the investigation, began to speak honestly. Private Ramirez was among the first to break the silence. Sitting across from General Clark, his voice trembled but grew steadier with each word. "Ma'am, it wasn't an accident. Carter kicked her on purpose. Everyone saw it." Clark leaned forward. "Why didn't anyone intervene?" Ramirez's eyes dropped. "Because, ma'am, in this unit, if you speak up, you're done. They'll make your life hell until you quit or transfer." Similar confessions poured in. Soldiers described hazing rituals disguised as team building. They spoke of leaders who laughed off harassment, of nights when younger soldiers were humiliated to prove toughness. They admitted that complaints had been filed before, but always dismissed by the chain of command. The generals listened, taking notes, their expressions grim. Each story confirmed what they had long suspected. Emily's assault was not an isolated incident. It was the product of a culture that thrived on intimidation and silence. Meanwhile, Carter was interviewed separately. He sat across from General Brooks, arms folded, his tone defiant. "It was training, sir. She couldn't keep up. If she can't handle it, she doesn't belong." Brooks's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You deliberately kicked a downed soldier. That's not training, it's assault." Carter shrugged, unconcerned. "That's your opinion, sir." Brooks's fist clenched on the table, but he held his composure. "No, soldier. That's the law." The investigation stretched into the afternoon. The generals toured the training grounds, inspecting equipment, reviewing logs, and demanding access to complaint records. They found inconsistencies everywhere. Missing entries, vague notations, suspiciously lost paperwork. The evidence painted a picture of negligence, if not outright cover-ups. When they walked through the barracks, soldiers straightened nervously. The general's eyes scanned every detail, the worn bunks, the atmosphere heavy with fear. One soldier whispered to another, "This is it. They're shutting us down." By evening, the generals gathered again in the conference room. The weight of the day hung heavily over them. Stanton broke the silence. "This unit is compromised. Discipline has eroded. Leadership has failed. If we let this stand, we tell the entire army that cruelty is acceptable." Clark nodded. "The soldiers are terrified to speak. That alone tells us everything. We can't salvage this with punishments alone." Brooks slammed his hand on the table. "This is rot. Rot doesn't heal. It spreads. We shut it down, reassign personnel, and make an example." Hensley leaned back, his voice steady. "Then we agree. But we don't just shut them down quietly. We make it public. Every soldier must see that this army does not tolerate betrayal of its own." The decision was unanimous. The unit would be dissolved, its colors retired, its leaders relieved, its soldiers dispersed. The generals knew the backlash would be fierce, careers destroyed, reputations shattered, but the integrity of the army demanded it. Outside, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the base buzzed with rumors. Soldiers sensed change in the air. Some felt fear, others relief. For Emily, still resting in the hospital, the news had not yet reached her. But the tide had turned. What Carter intended as humiliation had become a spark that ignited something far greater. 4 generals had walked into Fort Bragg that morning. By the time they left, the fate of an entire unit was sealed. The conference room inside headquarters felt suffocating, though its walls were lined with polished wood and flags meant to inspire pride. The blinds were drawn tight against the late afternoon sun, casting the room in a dim amber glow. A long table dominated the center, scattered with files, reports, and the faint smell of stale coffee. The 4 generals sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them like an anchor. General Robert Stanton broke the quiet first. He slid a thick folder across the table, his hand steady, though his voice carried a sharp edge. "We've seen enough. This isn't a matter of poor leadership in the moment. It's systemic rot. It goes deeper than one soldier's cruelty." General Anita Clark leaned forward, flipping the folder open. Pages revealed sworn statements, each more disturbing than the last. Her eyes scanned accounts of hazing, harassment, cover-ups, and unchecked aggression. She tapped a line with her finger. "Look here, 3 separate complaints from last year alone. All dismissed as misunderstandings. And now we have Sanders in the hospital with head trauma. This isn't coincidence. It's negligence built into the foundation." Across the table, Lieutenant General Samuel Brooks's jaw tightened. He had commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, had seen young soldiers bleed out on desert roads, had buried men and women he swore to protect. His voice was low, but thunderous in conviction. "What I saw in those barracks today was fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from combat, but the kind that comes from being hunted by your own brothers and sisters in uniform. That is unforgivable." Brigadier General Marcus Hensley, the youngest of the 4, sat quietly at first. He had listened during the interviews with soldiers, had watched their eyes dart nervously, had read the suppressed shame etched in their faces. He finally spoke, his tone calm but deliberate. "You all heard Ramirez. You all heard the others. They weren't just describing Carter's actions. They were describing a culture. And if this culture survives, it will spread to other units. You know it as well as I do." The room fell silent again. Outside, faint footsteps echoed in the hallway. Inside, the 4 generals wrestled with a decision that would alter careers, reputations, and the Army's public image. Stanton rubbed his temples, his voice quieter now. "We have options. We can court-martial Carter, relieve a few leaders, maybe restructure the training program. That would make headlines, but the deeper infection would remain." He paused and looked each of them in the eye. "Or we burn this down. Dissolve the unit. Send a message so loud the entire Army hears it." Clark folded her arms. "I don't take dissolution lightly. Units carry history, tradition, identity. But this one has already lost its honor. When a soldier can kick a comrade in the head during training, and others stand frozen in fear of speaking, that unit has forfeited its right to continue." Brooks's hand clenched on the table, his knuckles white. "You're damn right. I've buried too many good soldiers to watch a unit like this tarnish the entire institution. Discipline without humanity is brutality. And brutality has no place in our ranks." Hensley leaned back in his chair, studying the faces around him. "The question isn't just what we do, it's how we do it. Do we shut them down quietly, behind closed doors, or do we make this public? Soldiers across the Army are watching. If we sweep it under the rug, nothing changes. But if we stand in front of them, together, and declare this unit dissolved because of its failures, we reshape the culture overnight." Clark nodded. "Public. Anything less is cowardice." Brooks let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders dropping as if the decision carried physical weight. "Then it's settled. We make an example of them." Stanton straightened in his chair, his voice firm again. "Good, but we also need to think about Emily Sanders. She's lying in a hospital bed right now, wondering if anyone cares. If we dissolve the unit, but leave her in the shadows, this act loses meaning. We need to put her at the center, not as a victim, but as the catalyst for change." The others agreed. Hensley scribbled notes. "We'll coordinate with the medical staff, ensure she knows what's happening. When the time is right, she should hear it from us directly, not through gossip." Clark turned to another file. "And Carter? He doesn't walk away from this. A court-martial is inevitable. He'll argue it was training, that Sanders was weak. But no jury will buy it once they see the evidence. Brooks's voice hardened. He'll never wear this uniform again. The conversation stretched deep into the evening. They debated logistics, considered the ripple effects of dissolving an entire unit, and weighed the political backlash from higher headquarters in Congress. Stanton reminded them that some would see this as weakness, an overreaction. Clark countered that true weakness was ignoring rot until it destroyed them from within. At one point, Brooks slammed his fist against the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. If we don't do this, we send every predator in uniform a message. Keep your head down, and you'll get away with it. I refuse to leave that legacy. The others nodded, solemn but resolute. By nightfall, the decision was final. Orders would be drafted to deactivate the unit, reassign soldiers to other commands, and initiate leadership reviews across the division. Stanton took responsibility for drafting the statement that would be read publicly. Clark volunteered to brief the media, knowing her composed demeanor could weather hostile questions. Brooks insisted on addressing the soldiers directly. He wanted them to see the fire in his eyes when he told them their unit no longer existed. Hensley agreed to oversee the transition, ensuring displaced soldiers were integrated elsewhere without stigma. Before they adjourned, Stanton stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the table. We do this tomorrow. First thing. We don't give anyone time to twist the story. We confront it head on. Clark rose as well, gathering her files. This isn't just about shutting down a unit. It's about redefining what we stand for. Brooks adjusted his uniform jacket, his expression grim but unwavering. Then tomorrow, we tell the Army that cruelty is not toughness, and silence is not loyalty. Hensley closed his notebook with a quiet snap. And tomorrow, we start writing a new chapter. One Emily Sanders will be proud of. The four generals filed out of the conference room, their footsteps echoing in the dim hall. Soldiers standing nearby stiffened, sensing the gravity of what had just been decided. The generals did not speak to them, but their faces told the story. Something irreversible was coming. Outside, the night air was cool, the base lights casting long beams across the pavement. The sedans waited, engines humming. Stanton paused before climbing into his car. He looked up at the stars, hands on his hips, and exhaled slowly. He had commanded men in war zones, had faced ambushes and bomb blasts, but tonight carried a different weight. He wasn't just fighting for lives, he was fighting for the soul of the Army. The others joined him, each silently aware of the historic step they were about to take. Tomorrow would not be easy. Careers would end. Traditions would be broken. But justice real, uncompromising justice demanded it. And so, with grim determination, the four generals drove into the night, carrying with them a decision that would shake Fort Bragg to its core. The morning sun rose over Fort Bragg with a sharp brilliance, its golden rays cutting through the cool mist that still clung to the grass. Soldiers filed nervously onto the parade ground, boots striking the pavement in uneasy rhythm. Normally, such formations marked ceremonies of pride promotions, retirements, or unit accolades. But today felt different. There was no music, no flags waving cheerfully in the wind. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. By order of command, every soldier of the battalion was present. They lined up in precise ranks, hundreds of uniforms forming rigid rows. Eyes darted nervously toward the reviewing stand at the far end, where four generals would soon appear. The buzz of rumor had already spread. Something unprecedented was coming. Private Ramirez stood near the back, his stomach churning. He had spoken to General Clark during the investigation, had confessed truths he'd buried for months. Now he wondered if his honesty would cost him. Around him, whispers flickered. Are they disbanding us? They wouldn't. Not like this. Then why four generals? The speculation fed the unease, but no one dared speak too loudly. At precisely 0900, the sound of engines quieted as black sedans pulled up beside the reviewing stand. 4 figures stepped out, their uniforms immaculate, their presence commanding instant silence. General Robert Stanton led, his tall frame cutting a sharp silhouette against the rising sun. Major General Anita Clark walked beside him, her expression calm but unyielding. Lieutenant General Samuel Brooks followed, his eyes burning with controlled fire. Brigadier General Marcus Hensley completed the formation, younger but no less formidable. They mounted the stand together, their boots striking the wooden steps in unison. The soldiers below stiffened to attention, spines rigid, jaws clenched. The generals did not smile, did not return salutes with warmth. Their faces were grave, carved with the weight of what they were about to declare. Stanton stepped forward first. His voice, amplified through a field microphone, carried across the vast formation with clarity that pierced the morning air. "Soldiers," he began, his tone solemn, "today is not a ceremony of honor. Today is a reckoning." A ripple moved through the ranks: confusion, dread, anticipation. Stanton continued, his eyes sweeping across the faces before him. 2 days ago, during training, one of your own assaulted a fellow soldier. Private First Class Emily Sanders lies in a hospital bed because of an act of cruelty committed within this very formation. That act was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. Gasps echoed faintly, though most soldiers already knew the truth. Stanton's words gave it undeniable authority. General Clark stepped forward next. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying the weight of both compassion and judgment. In the aftermath of that assault, we investigated. We spoke to many of you. What we found was not the story of one soldier's mistake, but of a culture poisoned by silence and intimidation. Hazing, bullying, and harassment have been tolerated here for far too long. Leaders failed you. Comrades failed you. This unit failed itself. A murmur stirred again, louder this time, though quickly stifled by fear. Clark's gaze hardened. This army does not tolerate cruelty disguised as toughness. It does not tolerate silence when voices cry for help. And it does not tolerate leaders who look away. Now it was Brooks's turn. He stepped forward, his jaw set, his fists clenched at his sides. His voice thundered like a drill sergeant's, commanding every ear. "I've led soldiers in combat. I've seen men and women risk their lives for one another, because that is what it means to wear this uniform. But what I saw here, soldiers too afraid to speak, leaders too weak to act, is the opposite of everything we stand for. You do not betray your brothers and sisters. Not in training. Not in war. Not ever." His words struck like blows. Some soldiers lowered their eyes, shame seeping through their rigid postures. Others stared straight ahead, jaws clenched, caught between pride and guilt. Finally, General Hensley stepped forward. His tone was quieter, but it cut deeper for its steadiness. "Because of these failures, this unit can no longer exist. Effective immediately, by order of the United States Army, this battalion is dissolved. Its colors will be retired. Its history ends here today." The words crashed over the formation like a thunderclap. For a moment, silence reigned, thick and absolute. Soldiers stood frozen, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath them. Then came the murmurs, shocked, angry, bewildered. Some faces turned pale, others flushed with rage. A few, hidden in the back, exhaled in quiet relief. Stanton raised a hand, silencing the whispers. "You will be reassigned. Some of you will continue to serve with honor in other units. But this formation, as it stands, is finished. Its dishonor cannot be repaired." Clark's gaze softened, just slightly. Do not mistake this as punishment for every soldier here. Many of you have served with courage. Many of you tried to do right, even when your voices were ignored. But the truth remains, this unit's culture became corrupted. And so, for the good of the army, it must end. Brooks leaned forward, his voice like steel. Let this be clear. This is not weakness. This is strength. Strength to admit when something is broken. Strength to stand against cruelty. And strength to rebuild better than before. Hensley finished the address, his tone deliberate. Remember this moment. Tell it to the soldiers who come after you. The army you serve will never tolerate betrayal from within. Emily Sanders' suffering will not be in vain. Because of her, change begins today. The generals stepped back, their message complete. The silence that followed was heavier than the speech itself. Soldiers shifted uneasily, the reality settling into their bones. Their unit, their identity, their pride was gone. In the back row, Ramirez felt a strange mix of fear and vindication. He had spoken, and the truth had come to light. Around him, others wore blank expressions, struggling to absorb the magnitude of the announcement. Some clenched fists in quiet anger. Others seemed almost relieved that the burden of silence had been lifted. The generals stood together a moment longer, their figures tall and resolute. Then Stanton gave a single nod. The assembly was dismissed. As soldiers dispersed, conversations erupted in hushed tones. Some cursed under their breath. Others argued about fairness, about blame, about what came next. But no one could deny what had just happened. History had been made on that parade ground. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the reviewing stand stood empty, but its memory lingered. 4 generals had delivered a judgment unlike any in recent memory. A unit once proud now existed only in past tense. And though confusion and anger simmered, beneath it all lay a message that could not be ignored. Cruelty had no place in the army. Emily lay in the hospital bed, the harsh white lights above blurring into halos around her vision. Her temple throbbed painfully, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in her skull. Even lying still, she felt the weight of the past 2 days pressing down on her. The kick, the shock, the stunned silence of her fellow soldiers. She had been physically assaulted, yes, but it was the betrayal, the disbelief, the cowardice of those who watched and did nothing that haunted her most. The door opened quietly, and a nurse peeked in. "General Clark and General Hensley are here to see you," she said softly. Emily's eyes widened. She had been expecting inquiries, perhaps formal statements, but not generals standing at her bedside. Her pulse quickened, part fear, part disbelief. Clark entered first, her presence calm but commanding. Hensley followed, younger but equally imposing in demeanor. Neither smiled. They had come with purpose. Emily straightened in bed, trying to sit up, but the nurses gently held her down. "Don't push yourself too soon," one whispered. Clark spoke first. "Private Sanders," she began, her tone measured. "We wanted to come personally to inform you of actions taken regarding your unit. You should know what your courage has accomplished." Emily blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Actions? What do you mean?" Hensley spoke next, quietly but firmly. "The battalion responsible for your injury, your former unit, has been dissolved. Its colors retired. Its leadership relieved. Effective immediately." For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. She had expected investigations, maybe a few disciplinary actions, but dissolution? A word echoed through her mind like a bell tolling. Heavy, final, yet strangely liberating. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, adrenaline mingling with relief. They dissolved the unit?" she asked, voice trembling. Clark nodded. "Yes, The decision was unanimous among 4 generals. What happened to you was the catalyst. It forced the army to confront what had been festering under the surface for too long. Emily's mind raced. She thought of Carter, of the silence that had followed his assault, of the whispers, the fear, the complicity. She had felt powerless, isolated, betrayed by her comrades and leaders alike. But now, she realized that her suffering had been a spark. Her voice, once silenced by fear, had reached those who could act decisively. I didn't do anything, she said haltingly. I didn't even speak up at the time. Clark's eyes softened slightly. You did something far more powerful. By surviving, by not being erased, by letting the truth reach us, you forced accountability. Change began the moment we received the report. Hensley added, "This is bigger than you or the battalion. What happened here will be studied across the army. Policies will be rewritten, training protocols reassessed. Soldiers across every base will learn that cruelty has consequences, and silence can no longer protect abusers." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Not of self-pity, but of recognition. Her ordeal had rippled far beyond the hospital room. The assault, once a source of humiliation and pain, was now evidence of courage in its own right. "You should be proud," Clark said, her voice firm yet compassionate. "Not for what was done to you, but for what your experience has forced us to confront. You are the reason this unit no longer exists in its previous form. Your ordeal changed the trajectory of countless soldiers' lives." Emily swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I never thought I had that kind of impact. I just wanted to survive, to keep proving I belonged." Hensley shook his head gently. "Belonging isn't just about surviving, Emily. It's about standing tall, even when others try to break you. You did that. And now, your experience will prevent similar abuses in the future. That's an enormous legacy." Clark leaned forward, her gaze piercing but kind. "I want you to understand something crucial. What happened to you was not your fault. The failure was systemic. It was the failure of leaders to intervene, of peers to speak up, and of a culture that tolerated intimidation. But your perseverance and the courage of those who documented what happened created a turning point." Emily's mind swirled with conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, anger, exhaustion. She thought of the soldiers she had trained alongside, many of whom had remained silent, afraid to challenge Carter or the command structure. She thought of the medical staff who had recorded the events truthfully, and the generals who had acted decisively. Without each piece, the dominoes would never have fallen. "Will Carter face consequences?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. Clark's expression hardened. "Absolutely. He will face a court-martial. The evidence is clear, and the army will not protect him. He will answer for his actions." Emily nodded, a mixture of relief and lingering disbelief settling over her. "And the other soldiers? The ones who watched?" Hensley leaned slightly closer, his voice even. "They will be reassigned, given opportunities to redeem themselves under new leadership. But the lesson will be clear. Silence in the face of wrongdoing is no longer acceptable. No soldier, no matter their rank or tenure, is above accountability." For the first time since the assault, Emily allowed herself to breathe fully. The hospital room no longer felt like a place of confinement, but like a turning point. Her pain had been real, visceral, and undeniable, but so was the power of truth and accountability. Clark rose, straightening her uniform. "Emily, I want you to know that what you experienced will inform Army culture going forward. Your courage has set a precedent. The Army will not forget it." Hensley added, "And neither should you. Remember this. Change often begins in moments of vulnerability. Your willingness to endure, to survive, and to let the truth be told has created lasting impact." Emily felt tears prick her eyes again. this time accompanied by a sense of resolve she had not known before. She realized that while the assault had been devastating, it had also placed her at the center of something larger than herself. She was no longer just a soldier recovering from injury. She had become a catalyst for transformation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. I don't know what to say." Clark smiled faintly, a rare warmth breaking through her otherwise austere demeanor. "Say you'll continue. Say you'll serve with integrity, no matter the obstacles. That's all the thanks anyone needs." Hensley nodded. "And remember, Emily, your story will inspire others. Soldiers across this country will hear it. They will know that standing tall matters, even when it's hardest. You've done something remarkable." Emily's gaze drifted to the ceiling, then back to the generals. A sense of purpose bloomed within her, a quiet, steady determination. She had endured pain, betrayal, and humiliation, but she had emerged as a symbol of accountability, of courage, of unwavering principle. I will," she said finally, her voice firm. "I will continue. I'll make sure my experience isn't forgotten. And I'll honor the change it started." Clark and Hensley exchanged a glance, satisfaction mixed with solemn recognition. Stanton and Brooks would later hear of Emily's resolve and see it as the embodiment of what they had fought to protect, the core integrity of the Army. Emily Sanders, once a soldier caught in the crossfire of cruelty and fear, now understood the gravity of her place in history. Her recovery would be long, but her legacy had already begun. Her ordeal had forced the Army to confront its deepest failings, to act decisively, and to set a precedent for generations of soldiers to come. The hospital room fell silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Emily closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of everything: the pain, the fear, the courage, and now the responsibility. She had survived more than the assault itself. She had survived the system that had allowed it to happen. And in surviving, she had sparked change that no single soldier alone could have achieved. As the generals departed, Emily felt a quiet strength settle within her. She was ready to face what came next. The path would not be easy, but it would be meaningful. She was no longer merely a witness to injustice. She was a beacon of accountability, a living testament that courage, endurance, and truth could reshape even the most entrenched institutions. And for Emily, that was worth every ounce of pain she had endured. Weeks passed after the dramatic announcement on the parade ground. Fort Bragg's landscape remained unchanged, the same barracks, the same training fields, but for the soldiers of the dissolved unit, nothing was the same. They were dispersed, reassigned to other commands under strict supervision. Some carried lingering shame. Others carried relief. The dissolution left a void in their lives, but it also offered a chance to begin anew, away from the culture of fear and silence that had festered for years. Emily Sanders had returned home briefly, recovering physically, but still attending follow-up appointments at Womack Army Medical Center. Her concussion symptoms had improved, though flashes of pain reminded her of what had happened. She had been contacted by Army investigators and legal staff, who kept her informed about the disciplinary proceedings. Each update was a reminder that her ordeal had prompted consequences, not only for Carter, but for the unit as a whole. The court-martial for Private Carter became a national talking point within military circles. The evidence was overwhelming: eyewitness testimonies, medical reports, and internal statements from medics and other soldiers. Even Carter's attempts to minimize his actions could not erase the video evidence from the training grounds, nor the corroborating accounts from multiple soldiers who had watched in silence. His arrogance during interviews now worked against him, painting a portrait of someone unrepentant and unfit for service. The proceedings were swift. Carter was convicted of assault and dereliction of duty. The sentence was severe: dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of pay, and mandatory counseling for violent behavior. His actions had repercussions beyond himself, serving as a clear example that misconduct would no longer be tolerated, even within units long shielded by tradition or hierarchy. Meanwhile, the reassigned soldiers experienced a mixture of scrutiny and relief. For some, the transfer was humbling a reminder that they had failed to uphold Army values. For others, it was a chance to rebuild reputations under competent leadership. Army psychologists and counselors were deployed to support the transition, helping soldiers process their experiences and encouraging a culture of accountability and communication. Slowly, the ripple effect of the general's actions began to reshape attitudes across multiple units. Emily returned to the base months later for a formal debriefing. The four generals had requested her presence, wanting her perspective on the cultural reforms underway. She walked into the conference room with steady steps, her head held high despite the lingering fatigue from her recovery. The room felt different now, less intimidating, less oppressive. It had once been a place where fear dictated behavior. Now it was a place of structured oversight and transparency. General Stanton welcomed her first. "Private Sanders, we wanted you here to see the changes your experience inspired. The battalion is gone, but its legacy lives on through policy, through training reforms, and through the soldiers who will now be taught to act with integrity rather than intimidation." Clark gestured toward a series of binders on the table. These contain updated training manuals, new reporting protocols, and oversight measures. Soldiers are now encouraged and required to report misconduct immediately. Failure to do so will carry consequences. Your ordeal has redefined what accountability looks like in practice. Hensley added, "Your courage forced action." But it also created a model. Every soldier here and across the Army will know that standing by while others are harmed is unacceptable. That culture ends here. Emily felt the weight of their words sink in. For years, she had questioned her place, doubted her strength, and wondered if speaking up or surviving mattered. Now she realized that her experience had catalyzed systemic change. It was no longer about one assault or one unit. It was about the entire institution. I never expected this, she admitted, her voice steady. I thought I was just surviving. I didn't think I could make a difference. Brooks leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically soft. You did more than survive. You forced the Army to confront its failures. That matters more than you can imagine. Your experience saved others from enduring the same abuse, and that is a legacy no one can take from you. Emily's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief, pride, and lingering sorrow. I hope it helps, she whispered. I hope no one else has to go through what I went through. Clark's voice was quiet but firm. It will. Your story is now part of training modules, referenced for leadership education, and discussed in counseling programs. The Army will not forget what happened here, and that means future soldiers will have protection we lacked. As Emily left the conference room, she felt a sense of purpose growing inside her. She had endured physical pain, emotional betrayal, and systemic indifference, but she had emerged stronger. Her voice, once silenced by fear, had helped rewrite Army culture. Her resilience had set precedent, teaching the institution that cruelty is never a rite of passage, and silence can never shield wrongdoing. Back on the base, soldiers slowly adjusted to the post-dissolution reality. Leadership teams were replaced, training exercises restructured, and oversight enforced at multiple levels. While some grumbled, most began to embrace the new culture of accountability. Soldiers who had once feared retaliation for speaking out now found themselves encouraged to report unsafe practices or misconduct. It was a small but significant shift that promised a safer, more just environment for future generations. Emily's personal journey also continued. She returned to training, gradually rebuilding her strength, determination, and confidence. She became an advocate for soldier safety and mental health, participating in panels and mentorship programs. Her story, once a source of shame, had become a beacon of resilience and systemic reform. She inspired soldiers to stand up, speak out, and trust that the Army would protect them when they did. The general's decision to dissolve the unit remained a landmark case. It became a reference point for military leadership discussions nationwide, a symbol of accountability and the power of individual courage. Even years later, soldiers who heard the story of Emily Sanders recalled the bravery it took to survive, endure, and spark change. It reminded them that integrity was not just about obedience or strength, it was about humanity, responsibility, and moral courage. For Emily, the journey was far from over, but the weight of fear and betrayal had lifted. She had transformed from a victim of cruelty into a symbol of institutional change. Each day, each interaction with fellow soldiers reinforced the knowledge that one person's perseverance could ripple outward, touching lives, shaping culture, and preventing harm. And though scars remained visible and invisible, they were now a testament not to weakness, but to resilience. They reminded her, and those who knew her story, that standing tall in the face of cruelty matters. That survival, paired with courage, can transform systems. That one voice once silenced can ignite lasting change. As the sun set over Fort Bragg, Emily stood on the training grounds once familiar, now forever altered. The barracks of her former unit were empty, a quiet monument to the past. But in that emptiness, she sensed hope, renewal, and possibility. Soldiers trained with new standards, leaders watched with vigilance, and a culture that once tolerated fear had begun to embrace accountability. Emily's eyes scanned the horizon. She had endured, survived, and inspired change. And in that moment, she understood, courage does not always roar in victory. It sometimes whispers through endurance, through survival, through the unwavering insistence that truth must be heard. And when it is, even institutions as vast and old as the United States Army can change. Her journey, though painful, had made her a catalyst for justice. And that was a victory unlike any other.